Okay, can you hear me?
All good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, again, to gender pronunciation, please. If you have any POI, please text in the chat box. I always see chat box, but if I did not notice, please vocalize when the time will be about 6. I'm going to start my speech within 3, 2, 1. Go ahead. As opening comment, I'm going to talk about four things in my speech. Firstly, model for this debate. Secondly, how for the workers in turn inside the gig economy, they have the tremendous amount of the harm. Thirdly, I'm going to talk about why especially the context rise is cause of those kind of acceleration. Thirdly, I'm going to talk about the counterfactual, how in the counterfactual for those kind of casual workers, the situation will be better. So firstly, let's talk about the model. As motion say, this debate is not about purely gig economy itself is good or bad, but we have to focus upon whether or not that kind of rise deserve regret or not. Therefore, as government side, we want to assume that the counterfactual gig economy did not rise, which means that gig economy itself remain, but the scale is not measured or less recognition from the society. There is a less worker or less user inside of those kind of the gig economy itself. This is a paradigm which we want to assume, but opposition side have to support the paradigm of the rise of gig economy itself. For example, there is a much more casual access of worker or consumer or much more advertisement for those kind of things, or companies have a much more huge power than the government paradigm. This is a paradigm which opposition side have to prove and the government side have to prove. So firstly, let's talk about the situation of the workers is so how serious. What we have to recognize here is very simply exploitation likely to happen from two reasons. Exploitation likely to happen since those kind of contract is much more for individual or part-time job, which means that, for example, monthly or yearly, those kind of people have to reveal that's kind of their own contract or so forth. Their position is extremely lower from two reasons. Why? Because A, in the case of the general cases, actually, for those kind of workers, when they try to, for example, argue or, for example, require, for example, higher salary or status, much more, for example, insurance or so forth, is more difficult to negotiate or strike or so forth, is right. Secondly, more importantly, when problems happen, for example, when they get injured or, for example, get diseases or, for example, they are involved in customer trouble or so forth, is right. Actually, you are because, for example, individual owner or so forth, you are regarded from the company. You are responsible actor for those kind of issues, right? Therefore, you have to, because you are, for example, gig worker in this platform, we just give you the platform and you are the owner of this kind of problem, for example, incidents or so forth, right? Company is less likely to deal with that kind of situation. Impact here is that, for example, those kind of workers have to endure lower payment, or for example, or longer and longer, for example, working time, or for example, even though the situation is bad, they have to work. For example, in the case of the Uber, it's recently Uber is trying to maximize the profit and lowered, for example, payment to the each gig worker. Or for example, even in the case of the disaster cases, for example, strong storm exists, those kind of Uber it's require those kind of workers to deliver those kind of things, food to the customers or so forth, right? In this occasion, actually, those kind of workers are likely to exploit it. We think that kind of situation is so problematic because in this occasion, those kind of people's human rights are infringed, unfortunately. Secondly, why in the case of the rise, actually, these kind of impact are accelerated and why it is a cause. Three things in my three contents. A, what the rise means that it gives the lower hurdle for those kind of workers themselves. It will be the easy option for those kind of people. For example, there is an advertisement through, for example, YouTube or TikTok, and that kind of story of gig worker, successful story are likely to be enhanced and, for example, glorified because that kind of story is extremely catchy and sensational. For example, in Japan, within 1 month, I can earn, for example, 1 million yen. It's much higher than average salary in the case of the Japan, right? It gives us tremendous amount of the appealing point, attractiveness to especially younger generation. Younger generation. In this occasion, for example, social recognition to those kind of social recognition toward those kind of the gig economy, gig worker is much more lower and casual one. For example, just because, for example, friend do, I will also do that. Which means that without urgent necessity, those kind of people are easy to opt in this kind of gig economy. Secondly, companies' power will be much more stronger. Why? Because even though companies do not take care of each individual worker and they quit, then other human resources still opt into that kind of gig economy itself because that kind of context is rising. More and more people try to work as a gig worker. Therefore, those kind of companies use human resources as expendables. Therefore, exploitation are likely to happen. Thirdly, more importantly, especially in the case of the rise, competition among workers are likely to happen. It will create the coercive choice for the workers. Why? Because, for example, in the case of the Uber Eats, whether or not that kind of one order can be taken by only one worker, right? And who took is just winner, only one worker. In this equation, whether or not you can get the next order is extremely unsure. Therefore, even though payment is low, or even though, for example, the weathering condition is bad, you have to do that in order to earn money. Those kind of coercive choices are likely to happen because there is a hyper competition. Because that in the context of the rise, more and more workers opt to in. Therefore, we think rise is problematic. Finally, I'm going to talk about counterfactual. Why in the government paradigm for those kind of workers, the situation will be better. What we have to recognize here is that, as I told you in the model, gig economy itself remain even in the government paradigm, but the scale is small, which means that people who only have the strong necessity for those kind of gig economy will work. For example, person who have to nurse their elderly and parents, and for them it is difficult to get the regular time job. Therefore, they have to depend upon gig economy. For those kind of people, gig economy still remain. But for the people who are casually accessible, just because of, for example, curiosity or just because attractiveness, they do that. They do the gig economy. For those kind of people, in the counterfactual, there is an alternative choice, which means seeking a regular job. We think it's much more safer for those kind of people. For example, because in this occasion, contract is much more longer than the gig worker, for example, 5 years or 10 years, or for example, eternally, or so forth, right? Or for example, negotiation right or strike right is guaranteed much more. Or when problems happen, for example, incidents, or for example, disease, or for example, some troubles between the client or customers, companies have much more incentive to protect you. Therefore, compared with the gig economy, gig worker, for those kind of workers, condition will be much better, even in the general cases, in terms of, for example, safety, or for example, salary, or stability. Therefore, we think we have to regulate the rise of gig economy. That's why I'm happy to propose. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I call upon Leader of Opposition.
Am I audible?
Thank you very much. I call upon DPM.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, I'm I am speaker and gender pronunciation, please. If you have any POI, please text chat. I'm going to start my speech within 3, 2, 1. Go ahead. As DPM, simply I'm going to talk about two issues in my speech. Firstly, let me deal with the issue coming from the leader opposition. I'm going to talk about how their case is not exclusive at all, but even if it's exclusive, or it's rather counterproductive, I'm going to prove through my rebuttals. Secondly, I'm going to give you the extension. Why, if in terms of the worker, if in terms of worker, we cannot conclude this debate. Why, from the viewpoint of customers and consumers of gig economy, we have to regulate rise of gig economy? This is a tiebreaker of this debate, I think. So firstly, let me deal with previous speakers. Previous speakers conclude this conclusion. Previous speaker is here because that kind of gig economy gives the autonomous choice for the specific needs. For example, the female who, for example, single mother who have to raise their own children or so forth. Is firstly, we do not deny those kind of existence. Rather, we are happy to accept those kind of specific needs exist, and for those kind of individual, high gig economy itself is somehow good. I already agree in the Prime Minister's speech. But what we have to regret is rights, right? Which means that not only that kind of people who really eager to work as a gig worker, but also the casual user, for example, university student or so forth, is also opt in the context of the rights. We think, but in the government, in the counterfactual, we are happy to support gig economy itself remain, in this paradigm, actually, those kind of specific needs are likely to be meted even government paradigm. Rather, opposition paradigm have to prove why for those kind of the specific needs, context of rise is structurally important. As far as they could not prove this point, we think government bench already win this debate. But secondly, more importantly, rather context of rise is counterproductive for those kind of socially vulnerable people. For example, they talked about, for example, single mother, or we told you, for example, people who have to nothing elderly parents or so forth. For those kind of people, unfortunately, the time to work is limited, as they say, right? Which means that they have to work within, for example, pocket of time. But in the case of rising context, for example, more younger people, like the university student, or for example, 20s or 30s, for example, adult, also opting this kind of the competition or gig economy itself. They have more capability of physical power, or for example, time, for example, working hour, compared with those kinds of socially vulnerable people, which means that those kind of competitor earn, for example, more record, more money, or show their own result much more than socially vulnerable people. Then those kind of job, or for example, task or order are likely to concentrate on those kind of other competitor, not on the socially vulnerable people. Therefore, for those kind of people who are socially vulnerable, it is much more difficult to win the competition to begin with and to get the job to begin with, right? But in the counterfactual, similar people who really eager to work, who specifically needs gig economy only gather. Therefore, they have the similar background, similar situation, similar working time, or for example, condition. Therefore, there is a less competition. Therefore, even though those kind of target is so important, we think our paradigm is much better. But thirdly, more importantly, we think rather existence of gig economy itself hinder for those kind of people's socially advance. Why? Because since there is a gig economy and those kind of people can somehow earn the money and depend on gig economy, then, for example, political pressure to the, for example, government are less likely to happen. Why? Because to tell the truth, actually, who should save those kind of socially vulnerable people is the government, because the government is guardian and servant of every single citizen. Especially by using tax, we have to take care of those kind of vulnerable and weaker positions people. But government less likely to but because of, for example, political congress or political collision, those kind of things are less likely to happen. But in the case of the opposition paradigm, that's kind of the political pressure towards the government less likely to happen, because those kind of vulnerable individuals can depend on those kind of gig economy, right? And they can earn money, it seems that they depend upon by themselves. Therefore, we think government have less incentive to save. But on the government paradigm, even though those kind of individuals cannot get the job sustainably, then political demand are likely to happen. Voting, it can be the voting issue much more. Therefore, from the viewpoint of the macro scale, we think government paradigm is much better. Therefore, we think opening opposition's case does not have any meaning in this debate. Having shown that, moving on to the extension. Even though from the viewpoint of the workers, we cannot conclude, still we have the tiebreaker. From the viewpoint of workers, we have to regret gig economy. There are two reasons why. Because A, as we clarify, actually workers' conditions will be worse in the case of context of the rise, and companies' power is much bigger. In this occasion, check and balance system does not function, which means that even though customers have some problems and troubles and claim and, for example, report it to the companies have less incentive to hear and listen and improve their own situation. Secondly, more importantly, quality of service and quality of gig worker itself is not guaranteed, because there is no training system. There is just guideline exist and workers just read it. There is no trainer, or there is no role-playing practice, or so forth, right? Therefore, quality of service are likely to be worse in this occasion. Why is that? Because, for example, even though, for example, when we are talking about Uber, taxi, even though price gouging happen and there is some monetary trouble are likely to happen, or for example, in terms of the food delivery services, right? Actually, those kind of workers eat contents of the food on the way of the delivering, or those kind of problems actually reported, or for example, sometimes stalking by those kind of gig worker are reported in the social media or so forth. And even though customers report to those kind of things and claim on the SNS or for report to the customer service center, actually companies use the scapegoat, those kind of workers, for example, just individual worker. This is a problem of them. We are just give the platform, and therefore it's not the company's responsibility or so forth, right? They are just individual contractor or part-time job. They are not regular work or so. By using that kind of scapegoat, company less likely to deal with that kind of issue. But users' experience have to be worth much more. We think that a worker is the most important actor in this debate because they are directly involved. But if we cannot finalize this debate from the viewpoint of workers, we have to conclude this debate from the viewpoint of the customers because they are also important stakeholders. That's why I'm happy to propose this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I call upon a member of Gov.
Okay, am I audible?
Yep.
Okay. So POI on chat, please. If I don't take one, please vocalize. Okay. I'd like to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The opening's problem is the lack of uniqueness and impact. For OG, workers have various choices. I don't understand why the gig economy affects so badly. Minorities anyway are discriminated, so I don't understand why, particularly in this gig economy, it's bad. Opening opposition, they talk about flexibility of paying, but to what extent it's different from the current situation, I think they failed to weigh their impact. Then our extension here is the it's introducing a new actor because customers like workers, it seems like there's a less delta about companies. So I would like to explain two harms on local companies, not the gig economies. So first point about the companies. So in many, there are several analyses here. So firstly, in many countries in which gig economy develops, job applicants lack because of the aging society. Like many developed countries suffer from the aging society, the lack of young people, the lack of workers. The second analysis here, what does the rise look like? So people's working culture changes as the opening team says. So they prefer easy short-term employment, which mean because, for example, like as opening opposition mentioned, like having contract with companies takes time or tiring, like a flexibility that people can have, as O explained, and it seems that it's very, very attractive for workers. So that's why people's working culture changes. But what does it imply then? So basically, job opportunities are deprived from local companies who need workforce because they are desperate in need. Why they are very crucial? They really need those part-time workers, because to expand your services you need to you need workforce, and you need to expand your services to win in the competition. For example, if you want to start delivery services, you need workers to start. But secondly, many employers are actually aging, and that's why they want more people who can do physical works, and basically young people who will have part-time jobs on our side of the house. The impact here is that basically gig economy deprives those kinds of employment from these people. Basically, those companies will lose the competition from the gig economies. What happens here is that they are in the worst case, or in a likely case, it will go bankrupt because of the lack of employees, and they cannot offer services in the first place if they don't have any employees. So why different? Why then it's different from other multinational corporations, right? Opposition might say that, multinational corporations always coming in. Firstly, gig economy deprive of more workers compared to the conventional multinational corporations because easy employment, which means that more people will enter the market compared to other multinational corporations who still needed to take the same step as the local companies to get employees, but it's totally different in terms of gig economy. But secondly, it's not bounded by geographical factors, right? Multinational corporations were afraid of going to local areas because they were unsure if they can get enough employment or enough customers. So that's why local economies could prosper without in the local areas, for instance. But gig economies, like they just use apps, right, to like the employee workers. That's why they can easily extend their services without any sunk cost to local areas, and that's why this is totally different from multinational corporations. Before I move on, yeah, I'll take it. Oh, sorry, maybe that was not PY. Okay, I'll move on. So then, second point. So more importantly, there will be a forcible shift towards gig economy. So the rise or shift of people's preference to gig economy has another implication here, which is many companies have to adapt this strategy to fight back against, maybe one panel is not listening. I can start anywhere, but yeah. So basically many companies have to adopt this kind of strategy because in order to attract more and more workers, so
ごめんなさい。哲司君ごめん、一瞬止めてもいい？
はい。OKです。
大友さんごめんなさい。どこら辺から聞こえてなかった？
最初、アナリシスまで聞けたんですけど、そこからが本当に回線が途切れになってしまって聞こえてないです。
どこのアナリシスですかね？
カンパニーのですね。
カンパニーが、ごめんなさい。カンパニーのどこのですか？ごめんなさい。
で、ジョブアプリカンツが楽するっていう。
なるほど。じゃあ、何分ぐらいで時計って止まってるんですか？
本当に最初の1分くらいまでしか聞こえてないです。
なるほど。そうですね。どうしようかな。なんか、ちょっとジャッジ大会なので、聞こえないのもあれなんで、ちょっとやり直してもらおうかなと思うんですけど。
はい。最初からでもいいですか？
最初からにしましょうか。そうですね。最初からでやりましょう。
です。
すいません。します。
So I'll restart my speech in 3, 2, 1. So opening half's problem is the lack of uniqueness and impact. So in terms of OG, they said, workers have various choices. Workers will suffer, but basically workers have various choices. I don't understand why workers would be suffering uniquely. Minorities would be anyway discriminated in a society. I was not sure to what extent it's unique. As for opening opposition, they argued about flexibility or payment, but to what extent it's different, as the opening government mentioned. Actually, there are many like the companies who have such kind of system in the first place. So I think both sides lack the impact. So the extension I'm offering here is that harm on companies because the companies are more important actors in this debate in terms of the extent of the impact. So let's start analyzing here, and there are two arguments. So about the first argument, first analysis. So in many countries in which gig economy develops, job applicants lack because of aging society. Many developed countries suffer from the lack of young people. Basically, they are the future workforce. So that many companies want more workers. But secondly, what does this rise look like? So basically, people's working culture changes, as the opening have mentioned. They prefer easy and short-term employment because, for example, having contract with companies takes time or tiring, or like for workers, flexibility of gig economy seems very, very attractive, as opening opposition explained. So what does this imply? So basically, job opportunities are deprived from local companies who need workforce. Gig economy get more and more employment. So why for local companies, part-time workers are very, very crucial and they want. Firstly, to expand your services, you inherently need workforce, and because the market is very competitive, you need to keep improving your services. For example, in terms of delivery, you need someone to deliver your products, and delivery is actually very like attractive for many people, so they need workforce. So such kind of shift necessarily need workforce, and without this, they are likely to lose in the competition. But secondly, the many employers are aging. That's why there are some works that employers cannot do, like physical jobs, and inherently they need like the part-time workers who do those kind of work for them. The impact here is that the companies will lose in a competition against other companies. And in the worst case, they are likely to bankrupt in this kind of situation. They will need more workers, but the gig economy deprives them. But the important question here is why the gig economy is different from the conventional multinational corporations, because opposition might claim that anyway, multinational corporations, not gig economy, will come like McDonald's. But firstly, the gig economy deprive of more workers, right? Because a gig economy can employ people easily, which means that more people will enter the economy. And as opposed to like other traditional, like conventional multinational corporations, still they needed to take the same step to employ workers, as the local companies. For example, even if you want to work for McDonald's, you need to have take the same process. That's why many people prefer like the other local companies. They didn't see any like a significant difference. But secondly, gig economy is not bounded by geographical factors. So multinational corporations are afraid of going to local areas because they are unsure if they can get enough number of workers and also customers. So that's why like the other companies could prosper in those kind of local areas. But in terms of gig economy, in order to employ, they don't have like a physical store. They will just have apps to like hire those people. That's why they don't have any sunk cost to expand their market. That's why it will likely to deprive the many employments in local areas too. So those are the unique reasons why gig economy is very, very harmful for companies. But the second argument also about companies. So there is another implication of this rise of gig economy and shift of people's preference. So there is a forcible shift towards gig economy. So many companies have to adopt this kind of strategy, the same strategy to get employment. Because people prefer this kind of a type of employment, other local companies also have to offer such kind of employment, basically joining the gig economy. But second, the analysis here is that gig economies is always risky. So firstly, because it's easy employment, always a significant risk of easy loss of workers because they can quit quite easily. But secondly, it's very, very difficult to enter stock market and get stable income because it's the criteria of stock markets are very strict and they don't accept such unstable companies, which means that those kind of companies have to rely on like banks or like their fundraising will be limited to bonds, which is very risky because they have to pay a significant amount of money afterwards. So, and also it's very unclear if banks will lend to you. So in this situation, big companies always win because big companies are not afraid of like small risks. They will be able to invest dynamically because they have a huge amount of budget. In other industries, for instance, they have a cross industrial like the body. So small companies cannot win in terms of the fame or recognition of the people. And now the competition is even big, global, right? Because gig economy, as I mentioned, it's very, very easy to expand. So local companies have to compete against many other companies compared to our current situation in which like just a multinational corporation exists. So you just used to compete with local companies, but on their side of the house, many of them have to compete with gig economy. The impact here is that it's very difficult to plan long-term strategies for companies because they cannot have sustainable income, which is they will be very vulnerable to social changes. But secondly, they will lack budget, as I mentioned, and they cannot pay back those kind of bonds. That's why they're likely to go to bankrupt. Weighing bigger financial impact people who don't enter the market will get harmed by this mechanism. And it's directly related to their lives as opposed to customers or workers who just do part-time jobs. They are not that eager. But secondly, it also affects workers too, because after doing a part-time job, you need to get a stable job, but you don't have stable job basically if big companies go bankrupt. For those reasons, proud to propose.
Thank you very much. I call upon member of law.
Am I audible?
Yep.
Okay, great. Just let me take a sip of water. Okay, so my speech will start in 3, 2, 1. 2 extensions from CEO. First, why it's better for the poor. Second, why it leads to more general economic growth that benefits everyone in the economy. Before that, just one extraneous rebuttal to side closing government, right? I think their main case was that, oh, now like these gig economies are now going to destroy local businesses. But first of all, I think it's really, really unclear to me as to why like necessarily gig economies are going to now suddenly destroy these companies to begin with. I think the likely scenario is because there's going to be a lower entry barrier for these gig companies, or because there's like a lower legal cost. The likely scenario for these the likely action that these gig companies are going to take is more things like M&As or things like collaborations that can still like generate revenue to these local companies in the first place. For example, like Go can like incorporate like local taxi companies simply because that's a much more cheaper way for them to like actually enter that certain region than rather like creating a system from scratch. I think that still these local business can still gain revenue and still benefit anyways at the end of the day. But even if that's not the case, I think rather comparatively these local companies going away and these gig economy and like larger corporations coming in is much more better for consumers in those regions in general because they have a more economy of scale. I think they can decrease the amount of prices, for example, things like taxi services, which generally impacts the more vulnerable poor individuals in the region rather than and like more a larger scale of individuals rather than like a small portion of corporate workers in those local businesses. Therefore, I think basically we took up their case. Given that, moving on to the 2 extensions. First of all, why does this lead to significantly more job opportunities, specifically to the poor individuals and undereducated individuals on our side of the house, right? I'd like to say that OO also kind of mentioned this to begin with, but I think that our distinction with OOs, we explained exclusivity, why this kind of job opportunities are only going to happen on our side of the house. And I'll also like to engage with OG better in this point. Also, I would like to flag this as well. We like to concede that we like to concede to the fact to OG as saying that probably like full-time jobs are better than these kind of gig jobs to begin with. But that's actually the reason why it's significantly depriving poor individuals of these kind of full-time better paying jobs at the end of the day, or even job opportunities in the first place. But moving into the analysis of our arguments. First of all, why on our side of the house, comparatively because due to the introduction and the rise of gig economies, why it significantly increases the amount of job opportunities in the first place to begin with, right? But for us, first, I'd like to start off with the SQ analysis. I think that full-time jobs are extremely hard. Like it's hard to hire a significant amount of individuals through things like full-time jobs to begin with for several amount of reasons, right? First of all, I think that once you actually hire individuals full-time, you need to provide lots amount of worker protection. For example, giving them things like healthcare, also things like compensation when you decide to lay off those individuals, right? Which can be really expensive. Secondly, I think the moment that you actually hire individuals full-time, that means that those workers are significantly reliant on you. Therefore, you need to give them that worth of money, meaning that you have to pay them comparatively more than like cheap part-time jobs to begin with, right? That means you have to pay higher wages to the individuals. You have to give things like bonuses at the end of the day. But thirdly, I think that because these jobs themselves are very desirable and a lot of people want to get these kind of jobs to begin with, I think like things like the hiring process become very rigorous and also very costly to actually choose which individual you want to pick at the end of the day. For all these reasons, I think that actually hiring people full-time is something extremely expensive for companies. Therefore, companies can't afford to hire a significant amount of individuals full-time at the end of the day. I think comparatively, it's much more easier to hire individuals part-time or through the gig economies simply because they don't need to pay for all these expensive like cost fees that we just talked about, and simply they can get away with paying lower wages to individuals. Maybe they're providing less protection, but that also means that there's more capacity and more room to provide lots amount of job slots to these individuals at the end of the day, right? But at the end of the day, why are poor individuals likely to unaccess full-time jobs comparatively on their side of the house? I think it's simply because these jobs are competitive, meaning that the people that have a higher education or people that have like a unique skill sets are more likely to be hired compared to poor individuals that are unfortunately less educated as individuals. Comparatively, I think it's much more easier for these poor individuals to uniquely have access to this increase of job slots simply because these job slots are most likely things like manual labor. They don't require things like expertise. And because there's a low entry barrier, I think poor individuals can also be as competitive and join these market force at the end of the day and actually get a job comparatively on our side of the house. This is extremely important because I think because we uniquely provide that the comparative for these poor individuals on side government is no jobs at all. I think that even if it means that we're like exploiting them to a certain extent, or means that like maybe they're and exploiting them to a certain extent, that's comparatively better than no jobs in the first place. Actually having like being able to put food on the table is something much more important for these poor individuals to begin with. I also say that this is also much more important than the argument coming from OO about like how increasing job opportunities itself, or like job choices itself is something good, because I think that individuals are still like granted like the right to job choices to a certain extent anyways on our side of the house. I think that actually giving them money is something much more important than actually like marginally increasing their choices to jobs at the end of the day, right? But I like to also engage with like the preemption coming from opening government, right? They try to talk about like exploitation, but I just want to say like exploitation is like even if comparatively more exploitation will happen on our side of the house, it's not going to be so bad, and like it's not going to significantly harm such individuals in gig economies for four structural reasons. First of all, I think that because we're talking about the rise of gig economies at the end of the day, it means that competition exists, like Uber, Lyft, Go exists, meaning that there's there's competition incentives to actually make sure that they're not exploiting these individuals too much at the end of the day, because they want to hire more individuals at the end of the day. But secondly, I think that because when there's a more larger working force, because there's large amounts of job forces, and I think because these people often have things like common interests, I think there's also a large bargaining power towards these companies or even to the governments. Thirdly, I think minimum wage laws, basic healthcare still exist in such economies that have the rise of gig economies in the first place, most likely developing countries. But fourthly, at best, I think these individuals can still choose to opt out at worst, meaning that it's still their choice to opt into these exploitations at the end of the day, which still means that they concede to the fact of them being exploited at the end of the day, which is still okay. Given that, moving to the second extension, I think that I would like to explain why this leads to more economic growth. I think the first mechanism here is that generally people can have more access to like jobs at more easily and gain more pocket money, for example, to begin with. This is good because it simply gives individuals more dispensable income, meaning that first they have more money to use, meaning more utility to these individuals. Secondly, they're going to be more resilient to things like urgent economic shocks, to things like layoffs. Thirdly, I think it literally just means that more people are spending money, so it actually stimulates the economy at the end of the day. But secondly, I think that when we actually allow gig economies to rise, I think it means it gives companies an easier way to employ significant amount of individuals, meaning that it increases the amount of services that these companies can provide to individuals at the end of the day. For example, now people can have more access to taxi services, more access to things like food through Uber Eats comparatively on our side of the house. That also significantly increases the utility of individuals. Weighing, first, it impacts a larger amount of individuals compared to poor individuals, but secondly, because it also benefits the poor at the end of the day, I think we also co-opt the benefits and therefore win over OO in their best case. Very proud to oppose.
Thank you very much. I call upon Government Whip.
Sorry. Okay. If you have any POI, please vocalize it, so I won't notice if you put in the chat. So my gender pronouns is she, her. Starting in 3, 2, 1. So 3 things in my speech. Firstly, the rebuttal to CO, and secondly, the comparisons, and flip the arguments of O's argument, and lastly, compare the OG. So firstly, the CO. They set the arguments like about 3 things. Firstly, they say other poor people are likely better off because they can get more payments on their side of the house. But I think that firstly, that is not true, because they say, the poor can get like expertise by doing the Uber or doing the like driving the taxi. But I think that is to what extent this is really impact is likely to happen. I'm not sure that why they can significant a lot of monies on their side of the house compared to on our side of the house. I think like the people can get a full-time job, for example, in the local area or local retail. In that situations, they get more long time to work. And moreover, I think on our side of the house, more like stable like situation of the companies, as my personal career told you. In that situations, I think on our side of the house, even if the poor can get more expertise, I think I'm not true. But even if they can get those kind of like specialized skills, but I think those kind of situations, it's really unstable to stay in this community. In that situations, I think the poor people's worse off on their side of the house rather. And second things to the CO is that they say, that destroying the local business is unlikely to happen. They say, the M&A can be the like tools to like stay away those kind of things. And moreover, they say the poor people stay away from those kind of things. But I think that M&A or those kind of the situations or being the like included to the bigger companies is not the best way for the local business, because they want to like cherish their culture and cherish the history of the local business. In that situations, even if the financial statement is going up, I think the feelings of the local owner is really kind of like totally different from the situations of the financial statement. In that situations, I think M&A, those kind of like financials too, is not the best way for the local owner to begin with. And secondly, I think local owners are relatively poor because they can get only like doing those kind of like the small business. In that situations, the amount of money is relatively low compared to other workers in the big companies. In that situations, I think that those kind of like local owners are also vulnerable existence in this debate. And lastly, they say, they more economic growth, but I think that is not true. They say, more money, they can get more money and they can spend more money. But I think that even if the BOJ like increase their rate, but they also like still struggling to increase the to create the inflation. In that situations, I think just these kind of the Uber, these kind of the apps of the driving taxi, unlikely to increase the flow of the economies at the end in this point. In that situations, I think just the 100 like more salary unlikely to increase the whole economy of the flow of the money. Therefore, I think the economic growth is unlikely to happen to begin with. So moving to the OO's arguments, I think that firstly, we already flipped their arguments. They say, the workers can change their job casually, but exactly that is a really bottleneck of the companies manage. Because companies can expect the future, companies can expect financial states by doing this, because I think like on their side of the house, maybe the peoples are likely to likely to leave their job casually. In that situations, the companies can expect the financial statements in the future, because if they don't know what kind of like the sales is likely to be, or what kind of the gross profits is likely to be. In that situations, they can take the strategy which casually. That is a really significant harm, because they can take the strategy, and moreover, this kind of business are really new business, is unlikely to be public. That means is that they have the really vulnerable funding. Bond rate is really high. Of course, they don't have no equity. In that situations, on top of the management or financial, that is really hard. It's really out of the control if the employees left casually. That situation is really a significant harm, because the employees are all abandoned if the company is going to bankrupt. And moreover, they can get a new job suddenly. In that situations, at least they will fear the unexpected future. And moreover, at worst, they can afford the education for children, or they can get like the new job and they can get a salary at the end of the day. And moreover, let's compare the worst scenario of OO. I think like OO scenario is that money is really precious. But I think that it's the impact is really limited, because it's only you can do whatever you like. For example, you can go drinking party, or you can go whatever, like you can go the shoppings really casually. I think these kind of impacts is really limited. It's not big scale compared to on our side of the house. The company, if lose their profit, might be going to bankrupt. As I said before, employees are all abandoned. I think these kind of analysis or impacts is really more like deep. It's significant, more severe compared to the impact of the OO. lastly, talk about the OG. They said that like the workers' quality of life is really better compared to upside. And but I think like those kind of analysis, for example, the monthly contract, or second, the camp protest increase in salary, or secondly, the no insurance. The reason, all of the reasons on all of the analysis also applies to the part-time job in general. And moreover, OG said, oh, rise will accelerate the harm. But I think this kind of like analysis is not that. It's really speculative. For example, advertisement is sketchy, or companies' power is getting stronger, or more the competition is likely to be like increase. It's likely to be hard. But I think this kind of analysis is really speculative. My advertisement might be catchy, or companies' power might get stronger, but competition might be like likely. But I think on our side of the house, as a CZ, the local companies can maintain their own business. It's really clear, because as I said before, that maybe like those kind of like gig companies, gig economy is really huge. In that situations, local companies are forced to opt into those kind of business. And that's because like local companies don't have the really asset, don't have the capitals to win the competitions compared to the gig economy, because gig economy is likely to be spread at this area. In that situations, the impact is really certain compared to the OG case. Therefore, for all these reasons, I think the CEOs don't have the really mechanized at this debate, and moreover, really derivatives to OO. And moreover, we already flipped the OO's arguments, and we have more deepened analysis, more deepened impacts. And moreover, in terms of the OG, I think like we clear override in terms of the uniqueness. Very happy to propose.
Thank you very much. I call upon CEO. Opwood.
Am I audible?
Yep.
Oh, thank you. Okay, start my speech in 3, 2, 1. So first bench-to-bench comparison, firstly O, then OG, firstly O, then CG, and then finally OG. So firstly O, I think what is differentiate from the opening opposition side is that firstly they proved that the opening opposition is talking about the poor people talked only about weighing against their own opening comment, for example, like working condition, extra by saying like poor people is much more important. But they never proved that why the poor people is accessible, for the poor people our side still be better off in the first place. Our team is the first team that proves that for the poor people in their side there is no accessibility to the regular job in the first place, which is also never be explained in the opening comments, by the way. But also like we will clearly prove that firstly the poor people is gonna be better because the poor people have more accessibility to even the lower wage, even though the low wage is at best. At least we have more jobs in the first place. We can save more poor people in the first place. But secondly, my pattern clearly preview in the economic growth in the first place. I think it is more not only limited to the poor people, like more individual can get a job, and also more individual can get a much more like certain amount of money, and also this is likely to directly lead to the economical growth. It looks like, for example, like they can spend money on the spend money on for example, resilience to the urgent economic necessity theory. So I totally would prove that these kind of individual benefit. In terms of that, I think that we will clearly override the opening opposition side in the first place. Then going to the closing government side, I think the mainly two claims coming from opening closing government side. I think the first is that the company's harm, and secondly about impossibility of the corporation to adapting to the gig economy. The first is talking about harm to the corporate company, about like lack of the younger worker of the local company, etc. The first thing to note here is that I think the gig economy is I think it is accessible way to continuing their own like the strategy or own like corporation in the past. But it looks like, for example, like the larger gig economy corporation cooperate with the larger gig economy corporation on the first place. But rather, I think this thing I think it actually be possible in the first place. But secondly, I think in terms of the accessibility or in terms of possibility, they talked about like, oh, the gig economy is unstable, so this is impossible for the local economy. The first thing to note here is that I think their mechanism is totally very weak one. The first mechanism coming from CG is about like, oh, we can these kind like easily they have a possibility to losing their own employee in the first place. But I think this is opposite to also like likely. I think the more even though the moment like you lose lose the employee, at the moment like you will also like welcome the more employee. Those kind of employee can easily coming in as a OG we mentioned in the first place. I think this is why I think this kind in terms of amount of the employee, I think this doesn't matter in the first place. But secondary, I think secondary about like relying on the corporation, they have to rely on the banks, etc. I think this doesn't it doesn't matter. Insofar in the context of the other side, how these kind of the gig economy rising, I think in the sense, I think the investor or those kind of people who are caring about their own profit are likely to investing into these kind of economy in the first place. I think this is not the unstable one in the first place. But finally, I think even though this is unstable, anyway, this local local corporation in the first place, always these kind of people have to care about the limited demand of the limited amount of the people in the local community. I think this situation in and of itself is totally unstable. I think this delta is quite limited. Even though ultimately take the best case scenario, I think even though the corporation going to bankrupt, I think compared to the other cases, i.e. the poor people's benefit or the all individual benefit, I think we're overlaid in the first, right? But the first reason here is that in terms of the scale of the impact, we will clearly provide the more impact. They only stop it at the local community damages in the local corporation damages in the first, right? But we're clearly giving you the much more better. We ourselves we can protect the poor people who have no accessibility to job in the first, right? In their side of the house. In ourselves, we can give the lower. We can give the at least a certain amount of the money as a salary in the first place. I think, but second reason why we think our side is much more should be prioritized here is that I think these kind of in terms of like vulnerability, at best their impact means that I think their side of the house, like rich people who are comparatively relatively rich people in the corporation might losing job, but they have a certain amount of the job as a like saving their money in the first place. On the comparative, I think in terms of vulnerability or like the seriousness of their right, I think it's prioritizing poor people is still legitimate and also reasonable, and I think this is much more better in the first place. Yes, take a POI from closing.
I think the local owner are also poor because due to the small business, and moreover, at least on our side of the house, we can distribute the opportunities to local owners to maintain their business. What do you think about it?
So you should be more comparative. In now, I think local, even though like local like bosses, the local this corporation is not so rich as compared to the like urban corporation. At least these people is richer than the people who have no job in the any area in the past. But I think we have a more chance to these kinds of people. I think we'd still be better, and we should prioritize these kinds of people. But finally, going to the opening government, I think. The first thing to note here is that I think exploitation in every business doesn't matter in the first place compared to the poor people's income or poor people's welfare in the first place. We already override in the first place. But more than that, I think firstly, exploitation is never be happening. And rather, I think we will be better off in our side. The first reason here is that I think in terms of like compare like the two style of the corporate, two style of the employee. I think in our side of the house, employee have a much more experience about the working condition, and compared to in their side of the house, these kind of worker is likely to stay at one working condition, i.e. they have no way to compare their working condition. I think comparatively in our side of the house, these kind of the gig worker is actually have a much more likely incentive and a likely possibility to think about their own work condition, likely to tackle with the working condition in the first place. But secondly, because of this emotional right, I think at least in our side we have a more like as a corporation, they have a many rivals and many competitor corporation in the first place. Implication here is just simple. In their side of the house, if they were making the lower wages, or if they are making their like bad working condition, the other kinds of people working condition, the other like the corporation is much more attractive, and the many good worker quality of the worker are likely to go into these kind of good conditions. So that I think the other conclusion, these kind of the corporation continue the bad conditions actually we have only like the bad quality of the employee, i.e. their own reputation likely to go down. So that even though the gig economy corporation, these kind of people have these kind of corporations have a significant incentive to care about working conditions and exploitation in the first place. I think this simple exploitation never will work. Rather than I think those kind of regular jobs are actually much more toxic in the first place. The first three because these kind of they understand like the corporate like employees fear about being fired in the first place. They have so strong incentive to stay at these regular jobs, even though this is toxic in the first place. But secondly, your boss might destroy your self-worth and your ability to even want to fight for the bargaining in the first place. Totally, I think the exploitation doesn't a rather harmful in their side of the house, but rather we can give expression better, but also like we have given much more money to the poor people. We still be better off to the all kinds of people prior to the post.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the debate. Let me explain how things are going to happen. So, me and let me see the trainees. So me and Hamza-san and Yurika-san are going to deliberate. So we will maybe just do it on Discord. So we'll go to room 6 deliberation. And then for next, we have